Okay, these are my current latest settings for Microsoft Flight Sim. I'm going to also go over a couple of things that I do before even starting Microsoft Flight Sim, but I'm using the latest driver, which is, let's see here. All right, so it's 536.23, and I have a RTX4080 and a 5800X3D. We want to make sure, first of all, resizable bar is enabled. If you don't know how to enable resizable bar on your PC, one, you have to first set it in the driver itself and on your PC. If you don't know how to do that, do a Google search, because it is slightly different for depending on which motherboard you have and which card you have. So your motherboard settings you would have to enable resizable bar there, and as well to enable it in Microsoft Flight Simulator. I install some software called NVIDIA Profile Inspector, and within NVIDIA Profile Inspector, let's get the game up. It basically what it does is it shows you a bunch of settings in your NVIDIA driver that are hidden from the NVIDIA control panel, which is this. And we'll get to that in a second. But to enable it here in Profile Inspector, let me do a full screen here. You're going to scroll all the way down to here, Common Settings, and you'll see Rebar, or R-bar, which is resizable bar. You want to enable it. And then you also want to pick this first option, and then the last one right here, you want to pick the first option here. All right, so for size limit, yeah. Okay, and then I also disable shader cache for Microsoft Flight Simulator. So that's all over there. So apply the changes, and then when you apply the change, you'll see that the size limit goes to 0 times 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, all right, so we're all set here in Profile Inspector, and we'll take a look at my NVIDIA settings here in the control panel. So global settings, again, I have certain global settings that I set here, but they're not going to apply for Microsoft Flight Sim. So for Microsoft Flight Sim, in my control panel, anisotropic filtering 16x. All right, 16 times. Gamma correction is on. Anti-aliasing application controlled. Very important right here to set these two, anti-aliasing to application controlled. Now, if you can't set them, if they're already preset, that means your global settings are funky. All right, so you have to go back to your global settings and set these two, anti-aliasing mode and anti-aliasing settings to application controlled. All right, so back to Microsoft Flight Sim. Okay, CUDA CPUs is all. Transparency off, application background, max frame rate is off, low latency is off, max frame rate is off. Rolling down, we're going to go to power management, maximum performance, then texture filtering on for anisotropic sample optimizations. Texture filtering for negative LOD bias, important to set this to allow. Now, a lot of people have it set to clamp, and they complain about blurry cockpit gauges and all that. If you set this to allow, it'll clear up your cockpit gauges quite a bit. Texture filtering quality. Now, I have this set to high performance because I want texture filtering will definitely affect your performance. I upscale in the OpenXR toolkit, which I'll show you a little bit later, but right here in quality, I set it to high performance for the highest performance. Trilinear, or texture filtering trilinear optimization is set to on, and that's about it. I don't change anything else down here. Threaded optimization is auto. Now again, I have a 4080 and a 5800X3D, and you know, I can't really speak on any other hardware because I don't have it. So we'll close that down, and we're pretty much set there. I also have a couple of registry settings that help with a couple of things in VR and in the game itself. But I also do this right here when I start my mixed reality portal, and you should only be able, you should do this if you restart your computer or reboot and you start VR. Before you start any game, right click on your start menu, go to computer management, and you should only have to do this once per reboot. So if you reboot again, you're gonna have to do it again. But if you you know, end a game and then restart a game without rebooting or restarting your computer, you shouldn't have to do it. But anyway, right here, if you go to event, let me slow down a second and go back here. So you're gonna open up computer management, hit the performance tab, then data collector sets, and then system. Oh, no, not system, event trace sessions, that's it. So in event trace sessions, since I've already done it and I've rebooted, you'll see something called holographic shell. Holographic shell, you're gonna click to stop. Now you're not seeing it in my list because I've already stopped it. Okay, but look for a holographic shell. If you can't find it, hit the name key and it'll put it all in alphabetical order. And you'll see it right around here, holographic device, device HEC, blah, blah, holographic input, and you'll also see holographic shell. If you see it and it's started or it's running, right click it and then hit stop. But all of these are fine, these should all be running. Okay, but holographic shell should be off. I also have this right here, the intelligent standby list cleaner, which basically clears out your RAM. Again, if you don't know how to use this software, do a little Google search on it, learn how to use it. It's great for all your games. It clears out your RAM. All right, so I make sure that's on, and I also keep bitsum highest performance on, and in your task manager, you should have, and I'm using Process Lasso, which is basically a task manager on steroids. And under my active processes, you'll see here, Flight Sim, whoops, there it is, Flight Sim, and my CPU priority will be on high. All right, so you want to set your CPU priority on high. You have to have Microsoft Flight Sim running for it to show up in the task manager anyway. Okay, so now let's go into the Flight Sim, and let me do this really quickly. Let's take a look at our settings here. I'll do it in this mode, make it a little bit easier for you guys to see. Now I am in VR right now, so forgive me. Oh, you know what? Let me do this in 2D for right now. And let's do this in 2D mode. Give me 1 second here. Alright, so now we're in 2D mode. Go to the options, general options. Now on the PC side, I am using DirectX 12. And I use a windowed mode because for the way that I switch from the VR binocular view, where you see the 2 eyeballs in VR, and I'm able to switch it into a full screen 1080p mode, because I use 1080p for my flat screen monitor, because I have, especially when I'm doing these recordings or I'm doing a stream, I have a 1080p capture card, so I can't go any higher than that, 60 frames per second at 1080p, and I have to be in windowed mode, and you should be in windowed mode anyway for VR. It helps out your frame rates a little bit. Anyway, so there we go. I'm using super resolution on auto on the 2D side. I have frame generation on, and DirectX 12. Now DirectX 12, I don't recommend using it unless you're on the latest driver and you have a 40 series card. If you don't, you know, use DirectX 11. But again, this is for my system. These are the settings I use. Alright, so I have everything set on low here, except for texture resolution is on high and texture synthesis is on high. Just because I've read that they should be the same, those two settings should be the same on your PC side and your VR side. If not, it'll default to the PC settings. Now, everything else is low because it really doesn't matter because I don't play in 2D mode. And when I make recordings in VR, it'll show what's on my VR screen on the PC at 1080p with all these high settings on. So anyway, back to the VR settings. Now I'm using super resolution again. Balanced for my super resolution settings. AMD effect sharpening is down to 0. Reprojection mode is off. World scale is off. One very quickly before I even go on, here in the OpenXR tools, you'll see that I have my custom render scale is on 100% with the latest OpenXR runtime is on, and I have this unchecked, disable NVIDIA optical flow acceleration, and prefer frame rate over latency. We'll get to that in a second. But this is the latest version of OpenXR tools for Windows Mixed Reality. Now, if you don't have the latest version, you probably won't see these two settings right here. So get the latest version if you don't already have it, and install it, and make sure your custom render scale is down to 100%. And motion reprojection, I'm using 1/3, which is 30 frames a second, with motion reprojection on in the Reverb G2. Okay, and we'll get back to that in a second. So world scale, I have it on to 100% or 101%. I just have it on 101 because that's where the slider likes to be when I, was messing around with it and trying to just get it down to 100%. Now, like I'm just going to leave it there just for now. Global rendering quality is on custom, and my terrain level of detail 125. Off-screen terrain pre-caching ultra, terrain vector data ultra, buildings on high, trees on ultra, grass and bushes on high, object level of detail 100%, high volumetric clouds, texture resolution on high because that's what I have it on my 2D mode, anisotropic filtering is off because I have it set in my NVIDIA control panel at 16 times, texture super sampling 6x6, 6x6, texture synthesis on high because once again it's on my 2D settings, water waves on high, shadow maps 768, terrain shadows I just turn off because I don't really see too much of a difference with them on, and they do take up quite a bit of processing power. So, but my contact shadows are on high, windshield effects on ultra, ambient occlusion on high, cube map reflection on the highest 256, ray march reflection ultra, light shafts ultra, bloom is on, glass cockpit refresh rate is also on high. My traffic, I set this down, oh, these are all pretty high. Okay, so we're gonna turn all this shit down. So I don't know why this was reset, but we're gonna turn airport vehicle density down to, let's say, 15%. And then ground aircraft density, actually let's set that down to 10. And then we'll set vehicles to 15. And then worker density, we'll knock that back down to 10 as well. I don't really care. See, if you set these down a little low, you'll get less stutter. Whoops. You'll get less stutter when you're on approach for landings and shit like that. So leisure boats, I'm actually going to also set down to like 20%, 25%. Let's go to 25%. Road vehicles, let's knock that down to 15%. Again, I would like to have a lot of cars and shit, but I find ships and ferries, let's do 25% as well. But road vehicles do take up some CPU power and all that stuff, so we'll just leave those pretty low. So these are pretty good settings for less stuttering coming into airports and stuff and flying low to the ground. Now, AI and generic blah blah blah, use generic aircraft is on, or actually, let's turn that off. And then use generic aircraft models for multiplayer is off, so we can see everybody else, close proximity, and let's apply and save that. Okay. Sound is, these are all up to you. My data, this should all be on right here. And again, rolling cache I use off. My bandwidth is unlimited. I have a pretty good internet connection. I do not use any kind of cache for Microsoft Flight Sim, and for me it works out pretty well. Okay, so those are my settings here. Let's go back. Let's go to the world map. Let's load up close to San Francisco here. Let's just go to San Rafael, and we'll start on a parking spot. And we'll just use this airplane or helicopter here, or actually let's switch to an airplane just so we can do this a little bit faster, fly around a little bit faster anyway. So I'll load up in a P-51, and let me get my favorite livery. Okay, so right now we have live traffic on, and let's just turn on all players just to do. All right, and we'll start on the runway just so we can get a move on here. So I'm going to switch to VR, and I'll show you my OpenXR toolkit settings. Now to do this, I'm going to have to go into the Windows Mixed Reality portal here, which is right there. And then we'll turn that on full screen. All right, so right here are my settings for my toolkit. All right, so I'm using upscaling in CAS. I'm turning off my frame rate right. Well, let's turn that on then, just because we're doing a video. Let's turn the frame rate on. And all right, so these are important. Target frame rate is off. All right, CAS for upscaling, and my sharpness is at 45%. All right, so you don't have to do anything else on this menu. Let's go over to appearance. I'm using post-processing is on, and sunglasses right now is off, but I'll turn it on sometimes if everything's too bright. And these are my color settings for contrast, brightness, exposure, saturation. Feel free to pause this if you want to copy my settings, but I find that these settings for me reduce a little bit of glare. All right, so let's move on to inputs. Over prediction, I just set it for 10%. I find it calms down the cockpit shaking a little bit. For my system, override resolution, yes. This is very important right here. I have changed my settings. I used to be a lot higher at 4000 resolution, but now I dropped it down to 3600 and by 3527. Now, I don't see much of a huge difference between 4000 and 3600, but I do gain quite a bit of performance, so I leave it, well, not even performance, but it's a lot more stable, and I don't get many FPS drops at all when I'm using this, even over the cities. All right, so, and then these are my color settings again, 55 for red, 52.5 for green, 55 for blue. Field of view. All right, and also, I skipped over motion reprojection, should be on default. So it'll default to your OpenXR tools reprojection settings, which is locked at 1/3, which is 30 frames a second. Okay, so field of view is simple, and zoom one time, blind eye none, disable mask. So disable mask right here just takes away the border around your binocular view when you're doing recordings and such and things like that. All right, so we can exit, and that's about it for my OpenXR settings. Now let's load up here, and I'm gonna have to stop this right now, and yeah. we'll go back to here. Okay, so I use a program called Auto Hotkey, which is right here. And let me see if I can edit the script right here. All right, so Auto Hotkey is a little piece of software, and if you want to pause the screen, you can. This is for 1080p. If you don't want your recordings to have that binocular view, and you want a full screen, high quality mirror, I use Auto Hotkey. Now, a lot of people use the Oculus mirror or the Windows Mixed Reality mirror, which is horrible, and it takes up a lot of CPU cycles. This way with Auto Hotkey, this is my little Auto Hotkey. Again, if you don't know how to use the software, you don't know what it is, do a little Google search on it. Especially, I forget the guy, Fly with Nick, I believe it is. Fly with Nick has a good tutorial on Auto Hotkey and Microsoft Flight Simulator. But anyway, that's what I use. So I can do this. Okay, so that's the regular view with the mask off in the toolkit, and then I just hit a key combination and I can get this rocking right here. But in the menus, I like to use the regular view because I'm hitting everything in VR right now. So let's go to Fly, and then I'll switch it right there. Now, when I'm loading up, I'll hit the OpenXR tools again, and I'll click Prefer Frame Rate over Latency, and then I'll just close that off. And that actually helps out with your frame rates a little bit. And like it does what it says. It prefers frames over latency. I don't notice a lot of latency in the game, so I am not missing anything, and I'm getting a better frame rate for it. It's a lot smoother. Well, not a lot smoother, but it's definitely smoother. So anyway, and now I do that after I start the VR session because I do that after I start the VR session because if you start it before the VR session, a lot of times what will happen is you'll get this flashing on the screen in your headset, and I find the way to mitigate that is to literally turn it on after you've already started VR. Okay, so we're on the runway, and I'll just show you what I get. Now I'm locked at 30 frames a second, and we'll just do a little takeoff here. Ooh. All right, we're up in the air. I am still at 30 frames a second, and honestly, with these settings, I haven't, and DirectX 12 with the latest driver, I haven't had many frame drops at all, nor like a lot of skipping or those micro stutters. Every now and again I'll get a micro stutter, especially if I'm going to turn off these tags over here real quick. But a lot of times I'll get some micro stutters with in multiplayer because, you know, the game is multiplayer just does that. It's pretty taxing on your computer and your CPU and GPU cycles. I'm pretty sure it's CPU at that point. But again, I am getting a really solid 30 frames a second, butter smooth in the headset, and butter smooth external views. And we started close by to San Francisco on purpose because I just wanted to do a little, environment flying changes. So we're over the water right now. We'll do over some hills, and then we'll do some city flying. Now again, depending on your server, what server you're on, and how busy it is, and how close by other aircraft are to you, you might get some stuttering. I find that if there's an F-22 nearby and they're buzzing me, I might get a, hiccup in my frame rate or whatever, but it's literally because of that. It's because of the multiplayer. Let's turn down the lights a little bit. It's a little bright. All right, let's keep it around there. I'm also using Flow. I think it's a good little add-on if you can, does a couple cool things for you in the sim. All right, so again, 30 frames a second. Haven't had a stutter yet. Everything is running really beautifully in the sim right now. And if you're getting a little jitter, it's because I'm speaking and it affects the headset. And the headset picks up any tiny movement while you're moving your face, like talking. So I'm gonna not talk for a little while, and we'll just enjoy the sim. Okay, so we're at the city. I said I was gonna talk for a while, and of course, what did I do? I started talking. But we'll do some city flying, and I'll show you, and some low city flying, and I'll show you that my frame rate really doesn't budge. I might drop down here and there, but honestly, it hasn't happened yet. It's still 31 frames a second, 30 frames a second. If you drop below 30, you'll get a little jitter, a little stutter, but I haven't yet. Everything's super smooth, moving my head around, and I'm super low. Gain a little altitude here. I'll do dive bomb around the city. And again, if you were to get any stuttering in the city, doing this, flying in between buildings and such is where you'll get it. But as you can see, my frame rate is solid, 31 frames a second. Now, when I used to unlock my frame rate in reprojection, I would get, a pretty consistent 45 frames a second with my hardware, but with a higher resolution. But when it did drop to 30 frames, because it would pick the best frame rate. So it'll be either 30 or 45 frames a second, but when it dropped from 45 frames a second to 30, it was a little jarring. I would get that little stutter, and I hated it. So I just dropped it down to 30 to get a more consistent frame rate, no drops, and honestly, 30 frames a second is fine. I also have settings for 60 frames a second with no reprojection, but you would have to lower your resolution quite a bit and quality settings a little bit, and I find I want to crank my quality settings and image quality settings pretty high. Like you've seen the settings are all in a high and ultra, except for a couple of those shadow settings. But yeah, everything is super smooth. I haven't had a stutter since takeoff. I haven't had a stutter at all since takeoff, and yeah, everything. I'm flying over the city. I'm flying over open areas with really no performance hits at all right now. Now, again, your performance may vary, your mileage may vary with these settings. All systems are different. And honestly, I don't want to get into an argument with DirectX 11 and DirectX 12 right now, because I got into it with somebody on Facebook about it. And I'm like, honestly, he's saying his settings are definitive. He was like, because I did a, a bunch of research and blah blah blah, and these people say this and these people say that, and I'm like, honestly, I don't care what other people say, because my settings are solid. My settings are solid. I get consistent frame rates, I get solid frame rates, I get very little stuttering. If I did get some stuttering, I will drop I wouldn't even drop my resolution down. I'd drop my super sampling settings down to like maybe performance mode if I'm in New York or something like that, and but honestly, I haven't found that I needed to, even on DirectX12. So again, I haven't had one stutter throughout this whole flight, and I've been flying low to the ground. I've been doing elevation changes, inside, external and internal cockpit views. And, I could even, let's change the weather a bit. Now, I'll get a frame drop once I change the cloud settings, just because, that'll happen. Boom, like there will be a little bit of stutter, but I'm right back up to 30 frames a second. And this is scattered clouds. Let's turn up the lights in here. Still solid 30 frames a second in the clouds. No problems. Now, I usually don't fly with, a lot of extreme weather, so I don't, I'll turn on some rain and thunder here and there. But again, these settings really doesn't bother them. Everything is super smooth in the headset. Now, just one little asterisk right now for everybody watching this video. It might seem really smooth on the recording right now because frame generation does turn on in 2D mode. So I'm recording the 2D flat screen of my VR flight. In the headset, I'm getting 30 frames a second, no problem, and it's locked and it's super smooth. But what you're probably seeing on the recording is a super smooth recording because frame generation is on. And you'll only be able to do that if you have a 40 series card, yet again. Okay, so there it is. Those are my settings. I'm just going to bring her in for a landing to end the video. And I hope if you have any questions, let me know. Please like and subscribe. It helps out the channel. I don't usually do a lot of videos where I'm, speaking on top of the video itself. If I'm just doing a quality video or a video of a flight, but because this is a settings video, of course I'm speaking. Or if I'm in multiplayer or if I'm streaming, of course you'll hear me talking to the other people around. But yeah, everything is sharp and clear in the cockpit. So down there, if you look at my oil and fuel pressure, I can read the little tiny numbers, 200, 150. I can read the oil and fuel label and the pounds underneath that. No problem. I can read all the numbers. I can read almost every letter. What I can't read right here is the parking brake instructions right next to the parking brake, unless I come down to around here, and then I can read it. All right. So we're closing in on the airport now. But again, 30 frames a second, pretty thick cloud cover, no problems. Reprojection is on. Frame generation is on my recording and on my 2D screen, but inside the headset, unfortunately, we don't get frame generation yet. Probably never, but for VR flying, this is really smooth in the headset. I haven't dropped, except for that once I changed my cloud cover settings, I dropped down to 29 for, a couple of seconds, and then it shot right back to 30, 31. Yeah, having no problems whatsoever in VR. Close to the ground, high up in the air. Let's go high up into the clouds. Right there, I dropped down a little bit just because I'm getting close to the airport. I dropped down to 28 frames a second for like a split second. But the airport is coming up. It's right in front of us. Actually, let me drop some flaps because I am getting close. But yeah, there's the airport dead ahead that we took off from. No, it's not from where we took off from, but it's where I'm going to land. Alrighty. Just checking to see if my flaps are in the right position. They are. I'm going to give her a little bit more trim. And we'll start slowing down in a minute, but we're almost at the right landing speed. And I'll drop some power in a second once we get a little closer. I am in the glide slope. Now I'm a little low. But yeah, moving my head around, no problem. Again, super smooth. Not any issues whatsoever with my settings in my system. They're slightly different than when I made my last settings video, but these settings work for... Ooh, now I'm going super fast. Let's, there we go. But, yeah, since, the latest drivers... Whoa, do I even have... I don't have any gear up. Gear down. Anyway, so I did an emergency landing. I'm still alive. Plane is probably on fire. Let's get out of here. But yeah, since I've made my last video, I've done some changes just because the different drivers that have been coming out, and these are my latest settings for the latest driver that doesn't crash when using DirectX 12 in VR. With every previous driver prior to this one, DirectX 12 did not work in VR for me whatsoever, but now it does, and these are my settings for DirectX 12. They might change in the future, but I've been having a good time with these. I only fly warbirds and helicopters, and for warbirds and helicopters, these are great settings. If I fly a jet here and there, I might have to change my settings to performance mode or drop back to DirectX 11 because I find for some reason DirectX 12 doesn't play nice with jets. Like a military jet, for some reason, gets a little choppy in DirectX 12. But when I'm using these same settings with DirectX 11, I can fly the military jets no problem. I don't know what the issue is with that, but for some reason these are all I fly anyway: warbirds, propeller-driven warbirds, and helicopters. I hope this helped out. If you have any questions, like I said, leave a comment. I'll get back to mostly everybody who leaves a question. If I don't get back to you, it's just because I haven't seen it, or it's a stupid question. You know what I mean? But yeah. These are my settings, and they work for me. Have a good day, guys. I hope it helped.